way for me to really understand, what's going on in my world and how I feel. And so these first few photographs are actually newer. They're, from 2019. And I'm starting with them just to show you that my work is not meant to be taken literally. Like, I don't see my portraits as specifically portraits of these women that I photograph. Instead, I see them as a collective. So when you look at my work, for instance, it's called On Silence. What you're really looking for, what I want you to be looking for is really like an overall sense of what the feeling is. And it's about our silence. It's about the things we keep quiet. It's about the things that we don't talk about. It's about the things that we've sort of learned to kind of keep quiet, what we were maybe, learned just kind of not to talk about, the things that we sort of keep silence. And yet at the same time know that on some level, like they really shouldn't have to be kept silent. I think that my work has been about my own transformation from feeling like a silenced child, but feeling like I didn't really have any power in my own self-determination, in my own sort of agency, and my journey really to become a woman and own my own agency and own my own power. So I'm just going to start with this video here. I hope it's working on your end. To kind of point to the internal way that I tend to look at my work. It's really so much about what goes on inside our minds, how we feel. I'm interested really in the mind. I'm interested in the psychology of the mind. I'm interested in the kinds of things that we think about but don't necessarily discuss with, openly. And my work is turning more and more, it seems to be moving towards video, but I think it seems to, on some level, really clarify that notion that these are not necessarily portraits of these women I'm photographing, but instead, almost like a Venn diagram, they're about where these women and I intersect. Oh, it's not finished yet, sorry. Where our sort of our vulnerabilities intersect, where we as women, where we all kind of have something in common.
Are you talking with the women as you're photographing, as you're videotaping them?
Certainly not while I'm videotaping them, because no, when I videotape, I just tell them, okay, I'm going to turn this on, and they just are really free to just be there. I'm like, you just sit there, and if you need to move, you can move. Sometimes I'll say, oh, turn, I'll point, like turn left or turn right on the ones that I go like this. Sometimes I let them go completely on their own. Depends on how comfortable the other person is. But certainly during the videotaping, there's no talking. During the photo sessions, enough that we're very comfortable, that we establish a rapport. We tend to talk more in between, like rolls of film, rather than while I'm shooting. Anyway, I'm going to go back now that I've shown you kind of where I've come to, and I'm just going to go back a little bit and show you where I think was the beginning of my mature work, this is like sometime in the 90s, around 1996, something like that. I mean, I had shot before then, but I really don't think that was particularly mature work. And again, I started with portraiture. I was, at this point in my life, 96, 97, 98, I had 3 children, a very small baby and 2, 6 and 8 year olds. And the daughter is mine. The boy actually is a friend of my son's. But I started photographing. I was teaching. I was adjunct teaching kind of all over the Lehigh Valley. We live on a farm. There was a lot of maintenance. I was a very, very busy mother. And so I ended up really photographing, what was around me, like most, I mean, this happens a lot, like most women, really. And I didn't plan these photo shoots. I really just let them happen. And what I realized now, and it takes me years to kind of go back and look, especially then. I mean, now I'm like more savvy about it, but I really had no idea where I was going with this work. But I look now and I see this sense. I called this picture voodoo. We took this in Brazil. This was a trip we took to Brazil with a friend of mine, a student of mine who was Brazilian, and she invited us down to her house. I realize now, like, this is so much about this kind of sense of not having our own power, or not feeling like I could own to my own power. This one I called Icarus. This is a picture of my son down there in Brazil. First of all, nature is a very big part of my work. And partially, I know Lori mentioned that I live on this farm. All of my work has been done on the farm. Like, all of it is about, it kind of, I'm very connected to the farm, but I'm also connected to the land due to my relationship with my father, who had come from Greece. He was, he lived on a farm in Greece, and he really taught me how to live, with the land, about the land, how for him, the land was like this spiritual entity for him. And he really passed that on down to me. But I call this Icarus. And again, now in retrospect, it's so much about, the boy who flew too close to the sun, that sort of, feeling like too big for your britches, which was a thing I think I grew up with as a child, feeling like I wasn't really allowed to kind of feel so proud. There was this sense that I had to kind of keep things under control. Don't feel too good about yourself. I think it's a fairly common thing. I think a lot of us as women, especially, we can't sort of show all of our strengths. And now in retrospect, and I didn't know this at the time when I was shooting, but I think in retrospect, this was the feeling I had, that really it was about being kept down, being tamed, making sure that I was, a polite little girl with white little gloves and always acting like I was supposed to be, whoever they wanted me to be. Not really being able to kind of complain if I needed to complain, feeling somewhat powerless. And I think now in retrospect, this is what these pictures remind me of. At the time, this was 95, 1995. My father was dying of cancer at the same time that I took these photographs. So there is a mix of also losing my father at this point. I was very, very close with my father, and it was a very painful cancer that he had. So there was a sense of loss. There was this sense of death. There was also this sense of not wanting to look. I think I have a lot of images where people have their eyes closed, especially my kids. Again, these photographs, I don't see them as portraits of my own children. My children were simply there for me they were really vehicles for me to express something that I was trying to express. This was 96. This was just a few months after my father died, maybe a year after my father died. And this feeling of loss, which at that time I was attributing it to the feelings of, melancholy and mourning for my father. In retrospect now, I think that was certainly part of it. But I think I was also really thinking about my own feelings of loss, my own senses of, why I wasn't feeling like as really as strong as like I knew to myself to be. There's a lot of the images with the kids. I felt very free with the kids. This was a really freeing point in my life, because they didn't like posing, but they were kind of like, well, you know what, you let us watch TV for half an hour, we'll like pose for you. There was a lot of this going on. So, it was this mutual kind of agreement that we were able to make. I photographed, I see now in retrospect, my kids a lot of times with their eyes closed, and also a lot of times turning away. And this, I think you'll see later on in my work, seems to come up. I was really thinking about both feeling turned away from, but also at the same time, my own sense of defiance, my own sense of thinking to myself, I'm not really supposed to say things that other people don't want me to say. I'm always kind of being silenced. And yet I have a lot of things to say. And I was turning away in a very childish way as a child, in a very defiant way. I was a defiant child. I was a child who was always kind of, I was always acting up. I was the trouble child. I was the one who was always in trouble. I was the one who, really, I was like the one that was a problem. But in retrospect, I see I was also the one who was kind of calling attention to the things that I needed that I wasn't getting. This photograph was taken again during my father's decline. So the pictures, I think there's so many different multiple meanings with all this old work, but a lot of it had to do with my own sense of wanting to get out of a sort of an emotional situation that I wasn't comfortable with.
Did you write on his chest?
Yeah, it's a kind of an interesting story. I did, and he was like, "Hey, mom, like this is what kids do. Moms don't do this." Unfortunately, that day I had taken him right after we did the shoot. I took him to a soccer game, and unfortunately for my little boy, it was Skins versus Shirts that day, and he was Skins, and he was like, oh my God, he was mortified that he had to run around with these stupid words on his, but you know what the words, anyway, that's a side story, but the words really, you know, it's sortie was the word French for exits, outlets, escapes. And it was so much about my own feelings of wanting to get out of like a sort of an emotional stricture that I kind of felt. And this one, I call this the No video. This is recent, this is 2019. Thinking about my own defiance. I think the whole way, my whole attitude towards making art, my whole sort of, the way I feel about making art is that it's been my way to speak the things that I really wasn't ever allowed to say as a child. Just to be me, to allow myself to become who I am. I had to really kind of, I know it sounds weird, but becoming an artist meant being able to speak. Speak freely. I mean, speak freely. And sort of come to my own full self. Just back down to, this is 1998. And just a real quick little synopsis of the other piece of my story is that, you know, we were immigrants from Greece. My parents came here when they were invited here to finish their medical residencies. And while they came, temporarily, they came here completely like just to finish their degrees, to go back to Greece, build a home and live the rest of our lives in Greece. While they were here, they had me. And in quick succession, they had my younger sister. And as soon as my sister was born, we moved to Greece. I was 2 when we moved back to Greece. I was really just learning how to speak. You know, in those days, there was nobody saying, okay, now we're moving. You know, I found myself in this whole other, I have a brand new little sister and a whole new country and a whole new language. And we fully intended to stay there. My mother had an office in the house. My father worked at a hospital. My mother had an office in the house. I basically, I didn't really have a nanny. I was 2, and I don't know, it was a little odd. I used to just run around the house by myself. By the time I was 5, my father said, you know, I can't practice medicine here. We've got to go back. And we moved at 5. I was 5. We moved back to the States. I remember I was about kindergarten. Kindergarten was around October, and I was brought into kindergarten for the first day, and I didn't speak English. But from the time I was 5 to the time I was 8, we moved around like 3 or 4 times until we finally settled in Pennsylvania, in Allentown, Pennsylvania, where my father became the chief of pathology here. But really, until I was 8, I didn't have a solid home. I was just moving back and forth a lot. In the meantime, I had a younger brother. So one of the things, so everything was a little up in the air for me. I was a little like, I really wasn't quite sure like what was up, what was down. And I sometimes say that I began to I wanted to become an artist, I think, from that point. But I always say I began to take pictures so that I could prove to myself that what I saw actually existed.
Wow.
There was a point there when my children became about this age where they just that's it, we're done with the posing. This is boring and we're not doing it anymore. So I had to scrap it. At this point, I have 3 children, 3 little children. I'm teaching again, 3 jobs. And I had a teeny little studio in my house at the time. And I just sort of set up this little corner in my studio and started doing a series of still life. So from from 2000 to 2005, I did a series of still lifes. This was the one that got the most traction. I called it Chocolate, Hair, and Lint. I collected for 2 years baker's chocolate and photographed it as the piles grew. I also collected hair from my head that had fallen out when I blow dried. I would kind of wrap it up into little balls and hold on to it, stick it in this box. And I called them each like, like maybe this was 3 blows or maybe 25 blows or whatever. And I just kind of kept collecting the blows or the hair, the blow dried hairs. And the lint from the clothing dryer, which on some level, so like there was the chocolate, which was sort of a metaphor for my desires, for my hopes and dreams. There was the hair that was about my femininity and about aging and time. And the lint, which was really about my work as a housewife, really as a homemaker, but also, the children's laundry. Like I was still collecting, I was still photographing them in a way, but they didn't even have to be annoyed about it. And this pile just kept getting bigger and bigger and closer to my 4x5 camera. Finally, after 2 years, this is one of the ways a curator hung it. These are 20 by 24 inch prints plus the big mats. But finally in 2002, I'd had this teeny little studio and I just threw it all away. And I was so relieved. There was this relief of having finished. There was relief at getting rid of all this junk that was sitting in my studio. And I felt ready to move on to sort of the next phase of my life. One of the projects I did, this was a different project, and I've just started including this in my slideshows because I think it really speaks to the way I work. I have really tried in all of my work and really in all of my life in getting over my fears. I feel like I still do that. I have this little thing on this bulletin board as the kids were growing up, and I said, every day do one thing that scares you. And I think that's partially how I've really overcome so much fear that I had as a child, so much insecurity as a child, by looking at all my fears, by kind of constantly trying to tackle them. And I still do them. I still have certain, interior fears that I still try to tackle. One of the things I did was I did this video, and I interviewed 50 people in 2004, which, if you remember, was the year that George Bush was being reelected. It was the Bush-Kerry year, I think. And remember, he got reelected on the whole Iraqi war and how they were kind of pushing this fear thing, like, oh my gosh, they're going to come get us. There's all these weapons of mass destruction, blah, blah, blah. So I basically made, I'm just going to read this because it's a little quicker, a multimedia piece about fear. I made it actually as an artist in residence. I took actually 2 weeks off in that summer, which was amazing because I did have those 3 kids still, little kids, but I made it as an artist in residence at the Banff Center in 2004 during the election when fear was being peddled as a re-election tactic by the Bush administration regarding Iraq and Iraq's imminent threat that we were in if we didn't go to war. My piece is called Imminent Fear, relating to the fear that lingers inside of us. Imminent, rather than imminent. Imminent rather than imminent. So what I did was I literally asked 50 people 20 questions about fear. The same 20 questions, they were sort of choreographed in a very specific order. We would sit for about half an hour, and there were questions like, what does fear mean to you? Describe fear. Does it stop you from doing things? Does it stop you from moving forward with your life? Does it motivate you? Is it a driving force? Do you fear aging? Do you fear death? Do you fear conflict? Do you think people can fear no conflict? Are you afraid of terrorism? Why do you think the US is in this conflict in Iraq? Are you afraid to think the unthinkable, whatever the unthinkable is to you? And then the very last question was, what do you fear? At this point, we've been sitting for half an hour and people were kind of like loosened up, and I got a lot of really interesting answers. This is just what was on a postcard for one time when I showed it. These are just 6 examples of some of the people I interviewed. Men, women, young, old, all over. And because I did a lot of this filming at Banff, I had people from all over the world in the videos. It's actually pretty cool. And the reason I just show this to you is because my practice has actually involved a lot of other things besides, I'm known for my portraiture and it is mostly what I do, but I also do these like moving portraits, which I'm kind of now moving into. And also because fear has been also one of those things that I've tried to overcome my whole life. I've always kind of operated on this notion of fear, like, oh my gosh, I'm afraid of that. So I've got to really concentrate on it and work through it. And that's kind of what I do. So then in 2005, and basically the fear was based on the things that I couldn't say as a child, the things I was afraid to say as a child, the things that I was, not allowed to say. Yeah. So in 2005, I decided to move to color. I had never used color before. I had been photographing for maybe 20 years, strictly black and white. I didn't know anything about color. But I was sort of like thinking, I spend a lot of this time in the dark room. I never get, I'm always months and months and months behind on everything. If I move to color, it might just be easier. It's fast. You just take a picture, you send it to a lab, you're done. I had no idea, obviously. But so one day in 2005, I asked the kids who, my niece and nephew were visiting from Italy, and all the kids were playing out back. And I just said, will you guys just come stand here in front of my 4x5 camera and let me just watch, just see what happens. I said, it's a color test. That's all it is. So they're like, oh, okay. So they stood in front of me and I just said, they're like, well, what do you want me to do? And I said, I don't know, just stand there. And what was so interesting is how each one kind of took a very specific position. Like my niece in the front, she has, she's still front and center of every single conversation, that we're in. My daughter was in the back. She was like, yeah, this is, I've done this a million times. I'm not that interested. The boys, whatever. And it was kind of fun. I didn't think that much of it until I got the film back. And when I got the film back, there was just something so intriguing. This was the first color photograph I took. And it was something so intriguing about sort of the mysteriousness of it. And also somehow how, even though these kids were really close, like really, really close, they, also had it was almost as if they were kind of each one had their own very specific personality, and each one was wrapped up in their own little world. So I did it again. And for 3 years, I began to invite people to my farm. And I would ask, for instance, the woman the young woman in the middle was one of my students. And I said, could you bring people that you have a long history with? Most people brought family members, some people brought, friends, whatever, boyfriend, whatever, but basically someone who they knew very well, who they were very close to and had a long history with. And I just asked them to stand. We would go someplace on the property here, and I would just ask them to stand, and I would watch to see how they arranged themselves. And I was really watching to see who they were as a family, as a group, who they were in relation to one another. Who took the lead, who stood behind. Like in this one, for instance, I remember, actually this is the one photograph that wasn't taken on my farm. This is my neighbor's farm, our friend, the guy on the left here. I somehow had this precondition, this pre-thought that when I went there to photograph them, the young woman would be front and center because she was the only girl. And I figured she's going to be the princess. She's going to be the one who sort of takes center stage. Instead, the young man in the front sort of clearly dominated the scene. And the other ones sort of took their places somehow behind him. One of the things I do think is kind of fascinating about this is how the one in the front who does have all this attention, also, if you look at his wrist, his left wrist, how clenched it is. Versus, for instance, his sister, who sort of sits in the back, kind of more slack. And it was interesting to me because he's clearly the star here, and yet there's also there's so much tension kind of around this sort of star position. I've always been very interested in watching people. I'm interested in watching people. I'm always fascinated by people's backstories, like, what birth order are you in? I just, not for any morbid reason, but just, I'm always fascinated because I'm fascinated about my own. And I think the more you're interested in your own sort of psychology, the more you sort of are interested in and get interested in, like everybody else's. And this, this one I called it Portrait of a Young Man. For me, this image speaks to how sometimes one person in the family carries the load on some level, so carries it more openly. We all carry, family units, we all carry stuff from whatever the family unit, whatever happens at home, but sometimes one member carries it more visibly than the other members of the family, which was somewhat the case in this family. A lot of photographs I make of adult children and their parents. This one happens to be my husband and my oldest son. And these images of adult children and parents very often seem to be moving towards this idea of independence, of the separation that has to happen between a child and a parent. Separation has always been this issue for me. Separating from my past, separating from my mom. Here's a mother and daughter. Again, this sort of defiance on the part of the daughter, and yet you can sort of see that she's also going to be like her mom at some point. You could just sort of see it. It's like this give and take, this sort of beautiful flow, which fascinates me. These are 4 sisters. I called this invincible. They were all junior high, high school, and college at this point. I called it invincible because it reminded me of how sometimes we feel so invincible as young women sometimes, and then we realize as things go on that it's not, there's a lot to tackle. This is one of my favorites from that series. The series was called The Mark of ABEL, which came from a quote by Diane Arbus. I saw a show of hers at the Met, it must have been right around this time, around 2000, between 2005 and 2008. She said the Mark of ABEL was about the fear of becoming too successful. She says the fear of success is great, she says, because the higher you go, the greater the possibility of failure, of falling. And how that's such an issue. I see that a lot with people. I noticed that this fear of success is strangely prevalent in an odd way. It seems odd, but anyway, so for 3 years, I worked on this project. I loved it, and this was the project that kind of made my name. This was the subject of my first monograph. It sort of took my work and me physically, like, around the world. I traveled a lot of places showing this work. But after 3 years, again, because challenging myself is also so much part of my go-to thing, I thought, okay, I can do this like really easily. Like I'm good at this. It happens. It's not a thrill. It's not like it's not the challenge it used to be. I want to do something different. And this has also been my modus operandi all the way through. Every time I get used to something, every time it gets easy for me, I'm like, okay, that's done. You've got to move on to something that's more frightening and challenging. So I sort of changed all the parameters. So I went from outside to inside in my studio. At this point, I had built we turned one of our barns into a big studio. So I went from outside to inside, which is a whole different light. I went from group portraits to individual portraits, which is, again, a very different thing, because the groups were actually very easy for me because I could sort of balance people off one another. But with the one-on-ones, it was really now me and this other person. And it's a very, very different dynamic, much more intense. And also I went from a horizontal view camera, a 4x5, to a medium format, square. You can't tell, but this is a square image. Again, a very different format, very different way of seeing. And I tend to go back and forth between, rectangle and square. And each time it's jarring because I get very used to seeing one way, and then I have to completely switch the way I look through the viewfinder. So this was the first image in this series. This was 2009. This was my nephew, again, the Italian nephew, the niece and nephew were visiting again for another. They used to come for the summers a lot of times. And we were all out eating dinner one night out in the patio. And I had this melon sitting on the table that I was going to cut up for dessert. And my little nephew, Marcello, was wearing this little green t-shirt. And when I looked over and looked at them with the yellow melon next to his green shirt, I said, you know what? We're not having this for dessert today. I said, Marchie, I'm taking you up to the studio tomorrow. And kicking and screaming, honestly. I brought him up to the studio and he just sat there. He's like, what in the world do you want me to do with this melon? And I don't know. I said, I don't know. Just hold it, please. And we did a few rolls of him holding it. And when I got it back, again, it's just one of those things. I was so intrigued by the intensity of the image, of the discomfort of the image, of the mystery of the image. And so I tried it again. So I asked my daughter to come into the studio. I was like, I picked some mint from the garden and I brought her in. I just asked her to wear something plain. And we did it again. And I did this all through 2009. After a year of doing this, I remember very distinctly, and this is really part of my process. I remember very distinctly, I said to my husband, I think I just wasted this entire year. All this money I put into this film. I said, all I'm doing is taking these stupid pictures of these people holding a fish or a chicken or whatever. I said, I can't believe I don't know what I'm doing. And he's like, well, why don't you print them out and put them out all together and see what happens? I did. I made these 8x10 prints. I put them all out. I spread them all across the floor of my studio. And I realized, like, when I saw them together, that they were really quite a statement. They were just this incredible, like, as I looked at them all together, I was thinking about this feast, there's all this, it's like these people invited to a bank. It's almost like I've invited all these people to this banquet and each person brings something. Only it's not very clear if they're actually giving it. There's this weird psychological twist where the intimacy is kind of nebulous, right? There's, the work really for me overall is about intimacy and about the elusive nature of intimacy, it's really not clear when you look at it. They leave you so uncertain, I think. I've heard a lot of people say this to me. It's like, I'm never quite sure how to feel. Right, that's exactly it. You kind of don't know how, it's like they're offering something, but it's not really clear how much they're offering it or holding it back. And so it's really work that's about this longing to be loved on some level, this sort of deep-seated like longing that I had as a child to be loved more than I was loved, and always feeling like it wasn't forthcoming. And so there's this kind of push and pull of like, there's this sort of offering, but it really kind of is never satisfying. And the food, I think in retrospect, again, food comes up a lot in my work. It has come up a lot in my work. Again, unconsciously, it's not something I've ever planned. But I see food as really part of, it's about nurture. It's kind of a metaphor for nurture. As babies, like this is the first thing, this is how we know whether, if we're being fed on demand. That sort of shows us that we're, we're loved, that we're being cared for. So it is really this sense of the work is about love, about nurture, about this yearning for closeness that never seems to quite close the gap. I always think about that quote. I don't know who made it up or who says it, but that, you're sort of born alone, you die alone. So you're never really, you're really, and in between any of the issues that you've had, you really always, no matter how much of a family you have, no matter how many close friends you have, you really have to go through this sort of inner stuff alone. And that's, it fascinates me, that whole notion. I kind of look into that because it's a hard topic and I'm really interested in hard topics. So then again, I went back outside. This was 2011. So 2009, 2010, I did Falling from Grace. Something Like Love was, I went back outside, was again working with sort of mostly family units. A blogger had mentioned, I had read some blogger had written about my work and he was like, it's really interesting work. It's sort of about something like love. And I thought, right, something like love. How love is given, how love is offered, how love is taken. These are two sisters. After the shoots, I would ask the models. I used to like send them an email, like, thank you so much for posing for me. And I would send them, I'd say to them, I'm going to send you these 3 questions. You know, you're welcome. I would love for you to answer them. Obviously you don't have to. If you ever answer them, they will always be anonymous. They will never be no one will ever know who wrote what. If I ever do a book of this work, it will never be stuck next to your picture. And I asked them, what do you long for? What do you regret? And what are you afraid of? And I got some of the most beautiful, beautiful answers. Just a couple of examples. One young lady said to me, I long for a moment in time where I don't have to dim my shine for someone else to see their glow. Someone else said, I regret wasted time. Somebody else said, I'm afraid that the ones closest to me are the ones who know me the least. Somebody else said, I long to live my life honestly. What terrifies me is that the real me won't make it in this society. I'm afraid that this life will sink me. This is actually from a different project. I guess this was something like love. The next project I did, I went back to a square format camera. This is also outside though. Still photographing, you know, family members, best friends, couples. I love looking at people. I love connecting with people, and especially through the camera where I have like more power and more control than I normally would have in real life. I feel more control. I feel like I'm not, you know, sinking or having to like relegate my feelings for somebody else. I feel like I'm just there. I become kind of like the good teacher or the good mother. So not only am I being given a sense of control, I'm also using that sense of control to be like this really, really good parent. These are my photo sessions are, and when I say parent, I mean, you know, metaphorically, obviously, not literally. But these photo sessions are such a communal kind of experience. They're very, very loving. The models like will always talk to me about how like they felt so seen. A lot of the models are, you know, students of mine, friends, daughters, people that I know in some kind of peripheral way. This is a bit of an aside. This is a ghost portraits. This is after years after my father died. I did these portraits whenever I didn't have a model, you know, because again, I live kind of far out, and there were days when I would look out and the weather was so incredible, like this foggy, kind of rainy, misty day. And I was like, I really want to use my camera. I really want to use this light, but I wouldn't have a model. So I would take my fabrics that were backdrops and my backdrop poles and equipment and drive out in this little cart we have out into the fields and set up these, they're sort of like people, you know, they became kind of like portraits, but they were sort of ghostly. And, you know, they speak to presence and absence. They speak to like the loss of my father. They speak to also a different kind of love, I think. They speak to the kind of love that's kind of maybe there's like an openness to it, and yet also kind of a melancholy, kind of an expansiveness. But there's also kind of a mystery, and they remind me a lot of the stories my parents used to tell me when I was young. My parents had lived through both the end of World War, they were young, but the end of World War II in Greece, you know, when the Germans came down, it was bad, you know. And then my mother lived in the city in Athens. My father was from like the Peloponnese. The Civil War, the World War II was really bad for the city dwellers. But right after the World War II in Greece, there was a Greek Civil War, which was really bad for the farmers, the people where my father came from. So my parents had stories, like just incredibly terrible stories about the war. This was a install shot of one of the exhibits I showed the ghost portraits on. I hung them up with magnets, and this gallery, I don't see the windows up at the top. This gallery they've since closed off the windows, which is kind of unfortunate, but it was perfect for it might be better for other people, but for my work, it was like these portraits were kind of floating upwards. It was like the perfect space for this work. Let me see if I can keep moving a little bit. Let's see what time we have. Yeah. It was 2014, and I started to specifically focus on women now. I mean, I had been basically focusing on women, but I really deliberately and consciously started bringing women into my studio, only women. And again, I called it Longing in Black. You know, it's sort of a love letter to my mom about how much more like attention I wanted from my mother. You know, my mother was a bit of a distance. She really wasn't able to, she had sort of a kind of a narcissism. She wasn't really able to, I think she was afraid of intimacy, honestly. There was this sense. And I so longed for her. And I often felt like she was like turning away or closing her eyes. And so at the same time that I'm sort of feeling these feelings that I felt towards my mom, there's also a certain kind of defiance that I was also kind of pulling out of myself, needing to let go and needing to pull away because I was so angry that I wasn't getting kind of the love that I felt I should have. And so one of the reasons that I photograph both women and little girls and I mix them is because it's really this journey. My entire body of work is this journey of mine from a little girl to womanhood, and my transformation into my own, you know, to having my own agency and to feeling my own strength and my own power. I went back outside after that. This is about 2015, maybe, again, back to, I'm always drawn to photographing people together. I love it. This is a mother and her 3 daughters. The one on the left was my assistant for years and years. We're very close friends, and those are her sisters, a mother and daughters. And one of the questions I asked after these photo shoots was, what does love feel like to you? And while sometimes there are men in these, mostly they came with the woman. They really focus on the woman. 2 sisters. And one of my more recent works, and this is going to be Sleeping Beauty. This is a working title. We may change the title on this. Not that I don't love it, but it does seem to rub people the wrong way. I think people sort of see it as about the Sleeping Beauty story. I see it much more, for me, what Sleeping Beauty stands for is the beautiful strength that we keep hidden, the strength that we don't sort of necessarily show to others, our hidden strengths. And this is going to be the subject of my new book. This is the new book that's coming out. I just signed the contract on Friday, last Friday. And so what I'm doing here is I'm photographing women in both an exposed and vulnerable position, sort of traditionally building on the history of portraiture, but at the same time, like they look back at us with a very knowing kind of look, like they know it. It's like there's something inside of them that's saying, I see what's going on here. I am going to grow out of this, and I am going to like push out. But I mean, my feeling about this is that I'm really interested in the complexity of how we think and feel. Like I could, you know, rather than sort of objectify them and make them either really vulnerable and pathetic or make them like really strong and jumping around, my feeling is we're so much more complicated than that. And we're always evolving and we're always moving forward, and we're trying anyway. And this is about the complexity. I think as you look at them, especially in real life where they're large and they're palpable, they're quite uncomfortable. I've had a couple of shows with this work, and especially men are like, whoa, like I've heard a lot of men, and there's a couple of men said to me, you know, like you kind of are afraid to approach, but you also kind of can't walk away. Like they kind of hold you in their strange gaze. And this is when I started working on videos. And I realized that I was really interested in the discomfort, in how, in sort of showing my viewer how it feels to be in this less powerful position, sort of in a position where you're afraid to speak out because there will be repercussions, because, you know, speaking out will put you, you know, will land you in trouble. At the same, you know, it's sort of about empathy. A lot of the work is about empathy. It's about trying to get the viewer to understand what it feels like to be in the vulnerable position. And at the same time, my work overall is about the process of sort of standing up for ourselves, about the uncertainty of speaking out, you know, of speaking out for justice when it's like an unpopular thing to do. And it's about deference versus defiance. And they sort of straddle that weird place that I think many, many of us live. I see my work a lot as being about resistance, but an internal emotional resistance. And so this is when, you know, I'm getting better and better at this videotaping. I'm starting to understand, like, you can't use your iPhone because it, you know, moves around. I bring out my digital camera so that the camera now is more still. I'm also very interested in notions of like how, in the opposite of sort of social media, like the social media world has made us so aware of like how we have to catch somebody's attention really, really quickly. But that's not how things change. You know, things don't really change that way. Things change by us looking for a long time, concentrating, focusing, really working at something, you know, over looking at things really, really, really closely. And my work is really much more about like longer looking. And so while the work is very personal, I feel like it's also a very, these are all sort of very universal topics. You know, these are, and not even only feminine topics, honestly. I mean, men go through these things too, in a different way, of course. We have other challenges, I think. So I think maybe overall it's like about the process of recognition, recognizing the strengths that we keep hidden. I'm going to try to kind of move on a little bit since the videos and the stills work together. I show them in tandem. There's this interesting kind of like all of a sudden they become alive. Like you see them here in a still photograph, which are, you know, like 30 by 30 photographs. So they're big, you know, bigger than life size often. The heads are like bigger than our heads. And then you kind of look over the side and you see somebody moving, but just barely, you know, just blinking. And it's this like they're alive, and it's startling. And then I started shooting them upwards. It's really uncomfortable to look at someone for that long. You know, that my work has a tendency to look back at the viewer. I think that's one of the distinctions about my portraiture. I don't so much look at women, I identify with them, and they really kind of have this strange power over the viewer. Anyway, I'm gonna move on. Promised Land, I'm gonna zip through this. Again, these are paper crowns, you know, all these empty promises that we're told as little girls, we're going to be able to, you know, make as much as men, we're going to be able to, you know, have the authority we need, and yet we get out there in the world and look at Nancy Pelosi, she's being shit on like day and night, look at AOC, you know, look at what happened to Hillary. I mean, it's just, and so what I did was these are like, I'm photographing the women and girls with stains and smears, lipstick smears, as metaphors for the, you know, the stain, the stain that we carry with us of, you know, being told that you know, you're a slut or you're a whatever, you know, you spoke too loudly or you laughed too much, you left your teeth showing, you know, that whole thing. So paper crowns are a kind of a symbol for this sort of false strength that we're told we're going to walk through this world with. I've changed the name of this work. I hate titles. I think I'm calling it On Silence. This was my last portrait project I did before the lockdown. And the videos have taken precedence at this point. While there are still photographs that go with this work, the videos are the piece that I start with. I spend all the time in the studio with the videos. And then after we do the video, then we take a real quick picture. And the photographs are, you know, take no time at all, really. Again, I like to see them together, but I have a sense with these videos that they would be installed in a room where they're big, and you walk into a space surrounded by this it'd be like this very feminine space, surrounded by women, all different women, girls, older women, younger women. I'm really interested in the life of the mind. So much about what we don't show is what fascinates me more. And the surface, surfaces don't really interest me that much. What we show to the world. I'm always much, much more curious about what we're not showing, what we're not saying. You can see all of this stuff on my website. I'm just going to move on. So then there are stills that go with them. The little girls are the best. They're just amazing.
Lydia, when you show 3 people in one shoot video, are they the same video repeated 3 times, or are they different, 3 different videos?
What I do is I do clips, and then I put different clips together, right? So like I'll shoot like the one on the left for like 30 or 40 or 50 seconds. I'll turn it off and then we'll start again. I try not to move the camera. I try not to have them move it. That's why you can see the one on the right is a little closer, like she moved a little forward when I did it. So they're all separate clips that I put together.
Okay, thank you.
Let me move on to the next thing. Whoops. These are all very short clips of much longer videos. And again, I would just love to show in some space where you just walk in and you're sort of enveloped in this female area. I can see it's getting kind of late, so I'm gonna just kind of, you can find all of this on my website. Oh, this one's kind of fabulous. I mean, this is something like a 20-minute video, the actual video itself. I just have like a minute clip here.
Okay.
This video actually entails 4 little girls. The clip is only showing 2 of them, but there were 4 little. They're all sisters or cousins.
Amazing.
The little kids are the best. Whoops, whoa, hold on. Let me just run through this. I'm almost done. Oh, my camera, my computer froze. Yeah, my computer froze. Dang. Oh, Oh, here it is. Okay, so just to finish it off, I was going to finish that series. I was going to continue to work on this series, and then we got into lockdown, and I haven't seen anybody except for my niece and my daughter who were living with me for the summer. So I just started doing still lifes, and I ended up calling this Tangerine Dream. And what's fascinating is without anybody here, everything changed. I don't really, there are basically no models in this work. I see that this work is so much about the transition that I've made into, like, there's all this lush color rather than those austere and sort of simple colored, photographs I was making with portraits. All of a sudden, everything became lush and, joyful. And I see it as sort of like where I've come, how things have changed so much for me since I was a little girl, and how all my hard work has really, okay, now why isn't this working? I think there's something about first of all, they're about dance, because dance has also, I've allowed this sort of like joy to kind of seep into my work. There's all this, there's a certain amount of dance. This one actually has noise to it. But it's, again, kind of a metaphor for this dance of life. The hits we take, the small steps we take, the beauty, the difficulty, the complexity, and how, both the beauty and the complexity kind of sit side by side. I can't tell you if it's frozen or if it's actually still going. I think it's frozen. It's frozen. Anyway, this is basically the end of my talk, so we can maybe move on to questions. It's on my website, you can see it.
Thank you. I don't know if you want to unshare your screen so you can see everybody.
Yeah. My camera,
I can help you. Hang on.
can't get to.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you see everybody now?
I'm good. Yeah.
Well, that was incredible. I learned so much. Again, thank you, Lydia. I'm absolutely entranced by your journey and by the work that you're doing. Please, let's open it up for questions.
Yeah. Very happy to answer questions.
No question, but I feel really happy to be introduced to your work. I wasn't familiar with you, so this has been exciting to see it. And I am an art therapist, so I totally appreciated, your interest in the psychology of yourself and your subjects. And yeah, so just really loved your presentation and your willingness to share like your own vulnerabilities and journey. So thank you.
Thank you. It's interesting. A lot of my collectors are psychoanalysts.
Ah, I can see why.
They really get it. They're like, oh yeah. And there's a very famous psychoanalyst. He's probably at 100 at this point, but he's in DC, and he's got my work in his waiting room.
Ah, yeah.
He actually wrote the intro or the afterword for my second book.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and it was very inspiring because I like to use my art to kind of explore myself as well. So I appreciated, you describing how you do that with your work.
It's really a fascinating way to do it. It's so healing, and it's so fascinating, and it's so interesting, and yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I had a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Take pictures of yourself too?
Oh wait, I can't hear.
Do you take pictures of yourself too? Self-portraits? Sorry.
I did in art school. I started taking pictures of myself, but I actually think of all of these as self-portraits.
There's a couple of questions that came through in the chat that I'll just read off if you want. One is, were these portraits made with a view camera and film?
Yes, the horizontal, the rectangles were a view camera and film. The squares were a medium format and film.
Okay. Then there's a question that says, do you pay your models?
No. Oh my God, no, I don't make any money. I'm already broke as it is. No.
And
Wow.
then the last one in the chat was the shallow depth of field seems central, and why?
It's mostly a light issue, especially inside.
Oh.
I need the shallow depth of field just to be able to, I mean, I use a 400 speed film, but I'm inside for at least some of them. Or if I'm outside with the 4x5, again, it's a light issue. I like it. I really like it. I am absolutely I actually can't tell who's speaking to me, but who I'm speaking to, but anyway, it doesn't really matter. But I'm using the same equipment I've had since 1984. Like it's one lens, it's two cameras, one lens for each camera. There's nothing technical about what I do. I mean, I've gotten really good at what I have. I really know what I'm doing, but I kind of have like no interest in like getting, the only time I ever get new cameras, like I got a digital about 4 years ago, and I don't use it except for the videos now. I recently got audio equipment. That's a huge step for me. Like, wow, what do I do with this? But it's helping me with the audio on my videos. So the shallow depth of field, it's not that I don't understand, obviously. I mean, I've been teaching for years. I do understand it, but partially I think it is the light, but also partially, I guess, it's that it really helps the focus is on one very specific space. It's not kind of shared. It's the way I look at things in such a very, very detailed, focused way on very specific details. I think it's something about that. Does that answer the question?
I have a question, but although my video is not coming up, but I don't know why it says something with the host is changed to start video. And it's anyway. Let me go back. I just was wondering because this reminds me of the photographs don't look like Avedon, but Avedon did a series of portraits where the people didn't smile, and they were older people though, seniors, I would say, and they were called death portraits. And that, but I think you had mentioned you're purposely not having people. Hello.
Hi.
Oh, can you? Yeah. Somehow I've lost my Zoom here, but I'll just talk then. I don't see you anymore.
I don't know who's talking, but I'm listening.
Oh, okay. The portraiture of the children and in these when they're lying down or some of the young women and stuff, being in a vulnerable position, would you purposely make them stay with a neutral face? Not smiling, not sad, because you mentioned something where men looked at these and they couldn't turn away. Because it's interesting when children are put in this very vulnerable position of lying down, but just looking into the camera, and with no emotion there. Were you ever worried that perhaps, like if you went one way or the other with some emotion, that it might attract the wrong kind of viewer? Do you know what I mean? That because they are so vulnerable that there's that if men can, you know what I mean? I'm not necessarily pedophiles, but that there's these children are very vulnerable. And that, did you keep it purposely neutral so that it wouldn't go into any realm into that realm at all?
That's an interesting question. I never even thought about that realm.
Mm-hmm.
I keep it neutral for I mean, all of my work is neutral that way, I think. So it's not new to, like, for instance, the children on the ground. I keep it neutral because what I'm looking for is something that's more internal than surface. And if there's any kind of emotion, the viewer is stuck. If anyone sort of slightly smiles or slightly frowns, there's a very specific look.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when they keep it neutral. Now, I mean, I don't really ask them anything. Whenever people are invited to shoot for me to shoot them, like when I invite people, they're always like really, I mean, people are very willing to do it. Well, put it this way, young people. And men would love to, men keep asking me too. And I'm like, yeah, I don't do men. But there's a lot of men who are like, you know, you do all the women in my family. How about me? I was like, yeah. When people come to my place, when I invite someone and they're like, yeah, sure. I'm like, but please look on my website and see what I do and then answer me, please. Because it's really, this is not Sears. And there are a lot of women, especially olderish, you know, who, when they see their portraits, they don't like them because they're not used to seeing themselves serious. You know, I mean, look, I understand. I don't like to see myself in pictures at all. So I do understand. But I always say, please look at what I do and then agree, please. To, you know, I don't want you to come and be surprised that, like, you know, wow, I didn't get like a glam shot, because what I'm doing is not glam. So by the time they come to me and I put them out there, I never have to say anything. I don't have to say, look, I don't want you to smile, because for me to say that is completely against my principles. It's against my principles as a teacher. It's against my principles as a, well, not as a parent exactly. I had to be a little more strict with my kids, but it's against my principles to tell someone what they should or shouldn't do. I so despise that. You can tell it's clearly a strong emotional piece for me. Yeah, because I was so told like what I had to do and what I couldn't do, that it really, I don't like it. So I never tell anybody what they should or shouldn't do. I don't believe in it. So when they come, I am so open to them being whoever they are, with an understanding that they know who I am. There's this incredible mutual respect there. With the children, generally the parents either have said something to them but I'm not the one who has said it. I know this is extreme, but in good conscience, I'm not able to say to someone, no, I don't like what you're doing. I can't say that. There's nothing wrong with saying it. Many photographers say it. It's perfectly fine. I just can't do it. So for me, I just want you to be you. I want you to be you. The only instructions I give is, I want you, and again, this isn't so much holding for children, but in general, I want you to be there for me the way you are when you come down in the morning and make your cup of coffee and you turn on the coffee maker. You're just you. You're not smiling to yourself. You're not frowning to yourself. You're just you inside your head. That's what I'm looking for. And somehow, I think it's the rapport that we have. There's something, my work, I mean, a lot of people email me, well, how do you get that look? How do you get that look? And it's like, it's whatever happens between us. It's the love. You know, I fall in love with these people. Like when I'm photographing someone, like there's so much, first of all, the fact that they've allowed me to do this is beyond, you know, I just feel so grateful. And I really relate to how vulnerable they've become. The weird thing is, you know, historically as a photographer, you are, you know, considered the power, because you decide everything. I've decided everything. So I've been handed this certain amount of power. But I believe in being a Democrat, being a democratic ruler, someone who is able to share. Government to me means that we share and that we're respectful. So I guess I'm not thinking about pedophiles. I'm really thinking about the love that's going on between us and trying to get into that person's skin. Like when I photograph someone, I become them. I've been writing a text for my new book. And one of the lines that I feel the most close to, I mean, is getting edited all. I mean, I keep showing to people and people are like editing me out the wazoo. But one of the lines that I feel like I need to hold on to is, I don't look at women, I identify with them. I become them. I become them. I become me as a little girl. I become my mother. You know, if I'm photographing a woman, I become my mother. I become me when I was looking at my mother. There is such a mixing up of emotions that goes on when I make a portrait of someone. It's not like, oh, I took a picture, I'm done. Like it's nothing. It's like this my entire history of all my years comes flowing through through my heart, through my head, through my camera, onto that person in front of me. They're really complicated. And thank God pedophilia was not one of them for me. So it doesn't enter the picture for me. Maybe it should politically, but it's not about that. It's so much about identifying with these little girls. It's so much about who they are, who I was, and how much love I have for them. Something like that.
There's a couple of questions in the chat. Do you give models prints?
Yeah. Well, yes, I do. I promise them prints. And I tell them that I am absolutely going to give you a print, but you're going to have to bug me. Yeah. I will not, I want you to bug me because I just keep moving forward. And if you email me, you will absolutely get one. If you don't, you might not. So yes, I'm absolutely offer them.
And do you take commissions? That's another question.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As long as the person knows what they're getting into, absolutely. Yes.
I'm curious about do all the photo shoots end up with work that you move forward with? I mean, is there a bad photo shoot that you experience, or out of these, especially the recent ones with women, is there one that just like there isn't a click? I'm not sure, do you have ones that you're not happy with at the end of it?
The only time, every once in a while, mostly there's a click because I think I pick people that I know I'm going to click with, I think. But every once in a while, there is someone who the click is not what I expected. I work with whatever I have. So I can work with something that was not really what I was expecting, not something that I can't relate to. There are times, not many, I would say in all my years of shooting, there's been maybe 2, maybe 3 people where it was like, that I just really don't relate to that. Or I can tell this person's not giving me them. I work with that too. And I've had very successful shoots that way. The only other time when I feel like a shoot hasn't worked is if the person wore something that I couldn't get the colors to work. Because I don't tell them what to wear. And there are a few images where like, I love the whole thing, except the colors of the blouse that they wore. It's like, oh my God, it's just the color. I can't deal with it because it needs to be of a piece. I've started asking people like when they're in the ones that are not wearing black to say, could you bring me a bunch of outfits? Because like, if I don't like the color, I can't get it. I just have this, it's gotta be of a piece, So that's more what doesn't work. Mm-hmm. I can usually click into anyone. And if it's something that I don't relate to, then I work it in that way,
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Because it's so much about who people are. Most people though seem to just open up and really become themselves. And really what I'm looking for is someone who's just willing to be there for me. That's really all I'm looking. It doesn't matter who they are. It's just really the non-clicking is when someone I can tell they're just not allowing me in. That's really all it is. Just this. And I think it's a fear,
Does anybody have more questions? We're a little bit over, but it's been brilliant. So I'm totally fine. Nobody's running away. So I'd love to have more questions if anybody has any.
I think I saw something pop up some point about a lens. I quickly popped up and then disappeared. What lens did I see that or did I make that up? No.
Something about, no. I didn't see it.
Yeah, I asked, you said you just use one camera with one lens. Maybe you were talking about on your 4x5, but.
So my 4x5, I use a 150. On my medium format, I use an 80. Like there's one lens, like I use the standard lens per camera.
Like the normal lens for that format, yeah.
Like what would be a 50, 35? Yeah.
I do have another question. Just thinking about your position that you couldn't be who you wanted to be or say what you wanted to say were those actual people telling you that, or your interpretation of your culture that made you feel constricted in that way?
That's personal. Yeah, I think I was raised in a household where it was all about following certain rules.
Mhm.
Being an artist was absolutely out of the question. It was much too expressive. It was about, I had to be a doctor or a lawyer, something professional. Again, that's the superficial part of it, obviously. But no, it was part of how I was raised. It was, partially, I think my mom had, one foot in the old world and one foot. My mother was very modern. She was a dentist. She was beautiful. She was glamorous. She was smart. But she somehow also had one foot in like Constantinople. It was she was quite strict about who we were allowed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And who we were allowed to be was really very much about who she wanted us to be.
Right.
As
So,
someone
because you
who-
mentioned how close you were to your father, so I wasn't sure if it was, if these confines ended up defining your relationship with your parents, but it sounds as though you were able to be close regardless.
Well, first of all, my father wasn't like that at all. At all. He was really like, my father, I remember, always said to me, I know you, and I know when you decide what you want to be, you are going to do it. I know. I mean, my father wasn't anything like that. So it was it was really great for me because luckily I had this. My mom was, she was funny. She was both a lot of fun sometimes and sometimes difficult. But she, it was her way or the highway, for sure. That was just the way she was. It was her way or the highway. And I don't know if I was born this way or if I was just like her, or I just was I don't know. I was the first child. I don't know, but I just was like, well, what do you mean you want me to be a certain way? I'm just not like that. And I just refused to do it. So it was hard on me. I really, it's hard on the kid who says no.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
But thank goodness. Thank goodness I did.
Congratulations, Lydia, on the new work and on how far you've come into your own, strengths. It's really, really inspiring. It's been a great talk. Thank you, Lydia. I'm going to, I think we'll close now because I feel like people are starting to get on with their days, and I said noon. I just want to thank you very much, and I open the floor for other people to share their gratitude. And Lydia, good luck with the book. We can't wait. We'll let everybody know when it's out.
Next December, look for it, please.
And you're welcome back in the future, OSNAPs. It'd be great to have you in the space if you have time. But thank you.
Right. Thank you. I really appreciate it. This is so much fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really special.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Yeah. And, if you have more questions, certainly you're welcome to email me. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff.
Thank you.
I
No, it's
never
very
thought.
inspirational.
Really wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks so much for coming. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Lori, for inviting me.
Keep up the great work.
Yeah.
I love the stuff you're doing during COVID. It's nice. Thank you.
It's big. It's huge. It's right behind me. See this?
Yeah,
Beautiful. Really beautiful.
great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. It was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.